Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.
Job interviews making your palms sweat? One framework could 2.6 times your hiring odds, yet most candidates walk in blind. I'm Marcus, and today we're mastering the STAR method that turns behavioral questions from stumbling blocks into job offers.
Hey Marcus, excited to break this down.
Sarah, your interview insights are gold. So let's get real. Why do behavioral questions trip up so many talented people?
Over 80% of hiring managers rely on behavioral interview techniques, yet people show up unprepared. Candidates using the STAR method are 2.6 times more likely to get hired compared to those winging it.
So it's less about your experience, more about structuring your story. And most people are losing jobs simply because they don't know this framework.
Right. Behavioral interviewing is 55% predictive of job performance, compared to just 10% for traditional formats. The hiring manager isn't just evaluating what you've done. They're evaluating how you think, how you problem solve, and whether you can communicate your value clearly.
So what exactly is the STAR method?
STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. It's a framework for structuring answers to behavioral questions. Those "tell me about a time when" questions.
So basically, it's a formula?
Yes, and here's why it works. Our brains can comfortably process only about 4 chunks of new information at a time. The STAR framework's 4-step structure mirrors this cognitive limit, reducing mental strain for both speaker and listener.
So you're making it easier for the hiring manager's brain to process what you're saying.
Exactly. When listeners receive information in a predetermined structure, they can anticipate what's coming next. Stories processed through emotional engagement are retained with 40% greater durability. Days or weeks later, they'll remember your specific stories far more vividly than vague responses from other candidates.
Okay, so let's drill down into what each part means. Walk me through it.
That's a great phrase. Drill down into means to examine something in detail. The situation sets the context in 1 to 2 sentences, about 20% of your response time. For example, in my role as senior product manager at Tech Corp, our mobile app had a 45% crash rate on older Android devices in Q3 2024.
So that's specific but concise.
Right. Then, task. That's 10% of your response. You clarify your specific responsibility, not what the team needed to do. For example, as lead developer, I was personally responsible for architecting the solution and delivering a working dashboard within 10 days. If we failed, we'd lose this client, representing 20% of our annual revenue.
So you're establishing ownership and stakes.
Precisely. Now here's where most candidates either succeed or fail. The action phase. This should be 60% of your response time. This is where you demonstrate your thinking and decision-making capability.
So this is the meat of the story.
Absolutely. Include the specific steps you took, your thought process. I realized, or I decided, why you chose this approach over alternatives, and obstacles you overcame.
Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. I immediately realized we didn't have time for a traditional development approach, so I made a strategic decision to build an MVP first. I spent 3 hours reviewing the client's current dashboard and identifying the core metrics they absolutely needed. On day 3, we discovered the real-time data sync was causing database locks. Rather than waiting for DevOps, I researched and implemented a read replica architecture. This required me to learn Redis on the fly.
So you're showing your problem solving in action.
Yes, notice the language. I immediately realized. I made a strategic decision. I implemented. These are action verbs that demonstrate agency and ownership, not "we did" or "the team accomplished."
That's a huge difference.
It is. This is one of the most common mistakes, focusing on team accomplishments rather than personal actions. 50% of candidates fail to adequately highlight their personal contributions in team-based situations.
So they can't figure out what you specifically contributed.
Right. You'd say, when our team faced a critical deadline, I identified that our testing approach was causing bottlenecks. I proposed and implemented a test automation framework that reduced the testing cycle from 8 hours to 2 hours. I personally trained 3 team members and created documentation. This enabled us to ship the product 1 week early.
So you're acknowledging the team, but owning your specific contribution?
Precisely. Now the final phase, result. This is 10% of your response time. You quantify impact and demonstrate learning.
And I'm guessing numbers are important here?
Critical. You need concrete outcomes using metrics, percentages, dollar amounts, time saved, user impact. And here's what separates great answers from good ones. You also discuss what you learned.
How would I structure the results section?
We delivered the dashboard 1 day early. The client used it successfully at their trade show presentation. Within 2 weeks, they purchased a premium analytics package worth $150,000 annually. More importantly, I learned that I can rapidly acquire new technologies under pressure. This experience fundamentally changed how I approach deadline-driven projects. I now systematically identify must-have features first, build the MVP quickly, then iterate.
So you're showing both the business result and your personal growth?
Right. And that combination is incredibly powerful. It shows you're not just task-focused, you're reflective and continuously improving.
Okay, so what's the biggest mistake people make?
Providing vague, generic responses. Someone will say, "I'm a good problem solver. I always try to stay calm." In my previous role, I dealt with many challenging situations and handled them well.
That sounds terrible when you say it out loud.
This response signals either lack of real experience or poor preparation. Instead, you'd say, "In Q2 2024, our payment processing system was failing for 15% of transactions. I analyzed the error logs, identified that the third-party API integration had changed their response format overnight, and wrote a compatibility wrapper in 3 hours. Within 24 hours, failure rates dropped to 0.2%, preventing an estimated $50,000 in failed transactions."
Wow, that's so different. That's specific, detailed, with numbers.
Right. And here's the neuroscience. Real stories are always clear, emotionally colored, and contain specific details. Fabricated stories lack this richness. When you're recalling an authentic memory, your brain retrieves specific sensory details, making stories vivid. False stories lack sensory encoding, forcing candidates to use generalized language.
What's another common mistake?
Hedging answers or playing it safe. Well, I probably would have. Or maybe. I think in most situations, typically what I try to do, hedging language signals uncertainty and lack of conviction. Candidates who hedge their answers are perceived as 45% less reliable and competent.
So how would you answer confidently?
When I faced a deadline I couldn't meet, I took responsibility immediately. I met with my manager 48 hours before the deadline, provided a realistic timeline, and explained the technical challenges. I then worked extended hours to complete 80% of the deliverables on time, with the remaining 20% delivered 2 days late. Going forward, I implemented a 15% time buffer in my estimates. I learned that early communication and accountability matter more than last-minute heroics.
So you're owning the situation and speaking with conviction.
Yes, clear, confident answers increase perceived competency by 35%.
What about failing to quantify results?
Without numbers, the hiring manager cannot assess the scale of your contribution. Better is subjective. Numbers are objective and memorable. Amazon explicitly requires all behavioral answers to include quantifiable metrics.
So what would the right version sound like?
I redesigned our customer onboarding process, which had a 40% dropout rate. I implemented a 3-phase approach with milestone communications. The new process reduced dropout to 15%, converted 85% of free trial users to paying customers, up from 45%, and reduced support tickets by 30%. This generated $250,000 in additional annual recurring revenue.
Those numbers are so compelling.
Right. Candidates who quantify results are 50% more likely to leave a positive impression. Behavioral answers with specific metrics increase perceived impact by 65% and improve recall in hiring committee discussions.
So basically, your story becomes the story they remember.
Yes, because storytelling triggers neurochemical pathways in the listener's brain. When you craft your STAR response as a narrative, you trigger dopamine release, which enhances focus, cortisol, which improves memory formation, and oxytocin, which increases empathy and social bonding.
So, stories feel more human and memorable than abstract statements.
Right. The emotional resonance created by narrative increases the likelihood that an interviewer will advocate for you in hiring committee discussions.
How long should a STAR response be?
Between 90 seconds and 3 minutes. Remember, 20% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 10% result. Most candidates spend too much time on situation and not enough on action.
So they're setting the stage forever and then rushing through what they actually did.
Yes, and that's backwards. The action phase is where hiring managers evaluate your actual competency.
What about speaking negatively about previous employers?
That's the #1 predictor of future interpersonal problems. Even if your previous situation was genuinely difficult, framing it negatively signals poor judgment.
So how would you reframe it?
In my previous role, I worked with a manager who had a different leadership style. She preferred detailed documentation while I preferred rapid iteration. I adapted by providing weekly written summaries and learning her priorities. While our approaches differed, I learned the importance of meeting people where they are and that diverse perspectives strengthen teams.
So you're acknowledging the difference, but showing how you adapted and learned.
Right. Candidates who reframe challenging situations positively are 40% more likely to be hired.
Let's recap the key terms we discussed today.
STAR method, drill down into, agency, and quantifiable metrics. STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. Drill down into means to examine something in detail. Agency means taking ownership. And quantifiable metrics are the specific numbers that prove your impact.
Great. So our listeners can use these terms when preparing for interviews, discussing accomplishments, or writing resumes.
Right. And the STAR method works beyond interviews. Use it when advocating for promotions, documenting achievements for performance reviews, or networking.
So Sarah, what's the one thing you want people to take from this episode?
The STAR method isn't about charisma or confidence. It's about strategy, structure, and preparation. If you invest 3 to 5 hours identifying and documenting 5 to 7 STAR stories from your work experience, you'll walk into interviews with a roadmap. Research shows that 5 mock interviews using the STAR framework increases pass rates to approximately 80%.
That's powerful. Here's what we want from listeners. Think about your most impressive accomplishment at work. Structure it using STAR. Write it out. Situation, task, action, result. Record yourself and count how many times you said we versus I. Share your experience in the comments.
And if you try the STAR method in your next interview, come back and tell us what changed.
What a knockout conversation today. Sarah, you brought the insight and the spark.
Team effort all the way, Marcus. If this gave you a fresh angle on tackling the tough questions, I'm doing a happy dance. Go ahead and rehearse one answer out loud tonight. Your future self will thank you.
Honestly, the fact that you're here investing in your interview skills puts you miles ahead of most candidates.
And if you've got a buddy sweating an upcoming interview, be their hero. Send them this episode. We're all in this job hunting arena together, right?
Next time, we're cracking the code on one of the trickiest traps. What's your greatest weakness?
We're handing you the exact script to flip this dreaded question into your secret weapon. You'll discover why most answers crash and burn, what hiring managers are really testing, and the framework that turns vulnerability into victory.
If you've got an interview on the horizon, you absolutely need to hear this.
Keep prepping, keep shining, and remember, every tough question is just a chance to show who you really are.
Thanks for hanging with us today.
Already buzzing for the next one. See you there.
Business Essentials Podcast. Unlock your career.
Learn to speak business English like a pro.